the greatest art heists in medieval history. There's something strange about the Middle Ages that most people never think about. We imagine castles, knights, and kings, wars, plagues, and religion dominating everything. But hidden beneath all of that was something far more unexpected. Crime. Not just any crime, but incredibly daring, high-risk, almost unbelievable art thefts. And here's the twist, these weren't just random robberies. These were calculated, planned, sometimes even blessed. Because in medieval times, stealing art didn't always mean stealing for money. Sometimes, it meant stealing for God. Sometimes, for power. And sometimes, for revenge. Let's begin with one of the most shocking truths about medieval Europe. Back then, the most valuable objects in the world weren't gold coins or jewels. They were religious artifacts. Paintings, relics, illuminated manuscripts, objects believed to carry divine power. Churches and monasteries weren't just places of worship, they were vaults. And inside those vaults were treasures that could change a person's fate. Or destroy it. Now imagine this. You're living in a cold stone city. No electricity. No police force like today. No cameras. No alarms. But inside the local monastery, there's a manuscript so valuable, people believe it was written with divine guidance itself. And one night, it disappears. No broken doors. No witnesses. Nothing. Just gone. This is where our story begins. In medieval Europe, books were not just books. They were masterpieces. Each manuscript was written by hand. Letter by letter. Page by page. Sometimes taking years, decades, to complete. Monks would spend their entire lives creating a single book. And these weren't ordinary texts. They were illuminated manuscripts, decorated with gold leaf, intricate designs, and vibrant colors that still shine even today. Owning one wasn't just a sign of wealth. It was a sign of power and divine connection. Which is exactly why they became targets. One of the earliest recorded art heists didn't involve a gang of thieves or a dramatic break-in. It involved something far more dangerous. A dispute. In Ireland, during the early medieval period, a monk secretly copied a sacred manuscript that didn't belong to him. At first, this might not sound like a crime. But back then, copying a manuscript without permission was considered theft. Why? Because the knowledge inside it was seen as property. And more importantly, as power. The conflict escalated quickly. What started as a disagreement between monks turned into something much bigger. A battle. Yes, a literal battle. Men fought. Blood was spilled. All over a book. This might be one of the first times in history where art didn't just inspire people. It caused war. But not all art thefts were driven by religion. Some were driven by ambition. As kingdoms rose and fell, rulers began to realize something important. Art could legitimize power. If you conquered a city and took its treasures, its relics, its paintings, its sacred objects, you weren't just stealing. You were rewriting history. Because now, those symbols belong to you. And in the medieval world, symbols meant everything. Imagine a victorious king entering a captured city. He doesn't just take gold. He takes the cathedral's most sacred relic. A fragment of bone believed to belong to a saint. A jeweled cross. A manuscript that had been protected for centuries. These weren't random choices. They were statements. By displaying them in his own kingdom, he was sending a clear message. God is on my side now. And once people believed that, resistance became almost impossible. But here's where things get even more interesting. Not all art heists were public. Some were silent. Carefully planned operations carried out in the dead of night. No armies. No battles. Just shadows and intent. In one medieval town, a church housed a statue that locals believed had miraculous powers. People traveled from miles away just to see it. To pray to it. To touch it. And of course, to donate money. That statue wasn't just religious. It was economic power. And one night, it vanished. No signs of forced entry. No witnesses. Just an empty space where it once stood. The town was thrown into chaos. People believed it was a punishment from God. Some thought it had been taken to a more worthy place. But the truth? It was stolen. Most likely by someone who understood its value, not just spiritually, but financially. Because wherever that statue ended up, so did the pilgrims. And with them, the money. This reveals something important about medieval art theft. It wasn't always about the object itself. It was about what the object represented. Control. Faith. Influence. Even fear. Because if you could steal something people believed was protected by divine power, what did that say? Did it mean God allowed it? Or worse, did it mean God wasn't protecting them at all? That kind of doubt could shake entire communities. And in a time where faith was everything, that was more dangerous than any sword. Now, let's talk about monasteries. These places were supposed to be centers of peace, learning, and devotion. But they were also targets. Isolated. Wealthy. Filled with priceless objects. And often, poorly defended. Some monasteries tried to protect their treasures by hiding them. Secret rooms. Locked chests. Even underground vaults. But it wasn't always enough. Because sometimes, the threat didn't come from the outside. It came from within. There are records suggesting that some of the biggest thefts were carried out by insiders. Monks. Caretakers. People who knew exactly where everything was kept. They didn't need to break in. They were already inside. And when they decided to take something, it was almost impossible to stop them. One story tells of a monk who disappeared overnight. At first, no one thought much of it. Until they checked the treasury. A golden chalice was missing. Along with several smaller relics. The monk was never found. No one knows where he went. Or what happened to the stolen items. But this raises a chilling question. How many treasures were lost not to invading armies, but to quiet betrayals? As time went on, art theft in the medieval world became more sophisticated. It wasn't just about grabbing something valuable and running. It was about planning, timing, understanding human behavior, knowing when guards would be asleep, when doors would be unlocked, when no one would be watching, and perhaps most importantly, knowing who to trust. Because no great heist, then or now, happens alone. And this is where our story is just getting started. We'll dive into some of the most famous and mysterious medieval art thefts ever recorded, including a relic so powerful that multiple kingdoms fought over it, a painting that vanished for centuries, and a heist so perfectly executed that historians still can't explain how it was done. By now, you can probably feel it. Medieval art theft wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It was intentional, strategic, and sometimes almost invisible. And in this part, we move deeper into the shadows, into stories where entire kingdoms became obsessed with objects that could be stolen, hidden, or even weaponized. Let's begin with something that sounds almost impossible. A theft, where no one was sure a crime had even taken place. In medieval Europe, relics weren't just religious symbols. They were believed to hold real, physical power. Bones of saints, fragments of clothing, even drops of blood. These objects were treated as living connections to the divine. And cities competed for them. Because having a powerful relic meant one thing above all else: influence. Pilgrims would travel across continents just to see them. And wherever pilgrims went, money followed. So imagine this. A small town has a relic, a bone believed to belong to a saint. For years, it brings prosperity. People come, pray, donate. The town thrives. Then one day, it's gone. No broken locks. No signs of struggle. Nothing. But here's the strange part. Soon after, another city suddenly claims to possess that exact same relic. Not a copy. Not a replica. The original. And they insist it was divinely transferred. Not stolen. Moved by the will of God. This wasn't rare. It happened more than you'd think. There's even a term for it, holy theft. But the people involved didn't call it theft. They called it something else. They called it justification. Because if you truly believed a relic belonged in your city, if you believed your people needed it more, then taking it wasn't a crime. It was a mission. One of the most fascinating examples involves the city of Bari. In the 11th century, sailors traveled to a distant land where the remains of a famous saint were kept. The tomb was guarded, respected, protected for generations. But that didn't stop them. They entered the site, opened the tomb, and took the remains. Not quietly, not secretly. They knew exactly what they were doing. And when they returned home, they were celebrated. Not as thieves, but as heroes. Because now, their city possessed something extraordinary. The relics of Saint Nicholas. Think about that for a moment. A group of men travels across the sea, removes human remains from a sacred tomb, brings them back. And instead of punishment, they receive honor. Why? Because in the medieval mindset, possession was everything. Whoever held the relic, held the power. And once it was inside their city walls, it became part of their identity, their protection, their claim to divine favor. But not all heists were this bold. Some were far more subtle, more patient, and in many ways, more dangerous. Let's shift from relics to something equally valuable. Knowledge. In a time when most people couldn't read, books were incredibly rare. And among them, some stood above all others. Massive, mysterious, and almost legendary. One of the most famous examples is the Codex Gigas. This wasn't just a book. It was enormous, so large that lifting it required more than one person. Filled with religious texts, medical knowledge, and strange illustrations, including a full-page image of the devil itself. And like many medieval treasures, its history is filled with mystery. At one point, this manuscript was moved, taken from its original location and transported across regions. Not destroyed, not lost, but taken. Why? because owning such a book meant controlling the knowledge inside it. And in the medieval world, knowledge was power in its purest form. Now imagine being the person responsible for guarding something like that. A single manuscript worth more than an entire village. How do you protect it? Locks? Walls? Guards? None of it was truly enough. Because if someone wanted it badly enough, they would find a way. And sometimes, that way didn't involve force at all. It involved trust. There are accounts of travelers, scholars, even religious figures being granted access to sacred libraries. They were welcomed, respected, given permission to study. And in some cases, they never returned everything they took. A page removed here. A small text copied there. Something slipped into a bag, unnoticed. Over time, entire works could disappear piece by piece. Not through a dramatic heist, but through a slow, almost invisible process. And then there are the thefts that were never solved. The ones that leave behind nothing but questions. In one monastery, a reliquary, an ornate container holding sacred remains, was kept under constant watch. It was locked, secured, watched day and night. And yet, one morning, it was gone. No broken lock. No open door. No sign of intrusion. It simply wasn't there anymore. Think about how unsettling that would be. In a world where people believed God was always watching. How does something vanish from a holy place? Some believed it was divine intervention. Others suspected betrayal. But no one could prove anything. And the object was never found. These are the kinds of stories that define medieval art theft. Not just bold robberies, but mysteries. Disappearances that don't make sense. Crimes that blur the line between human action and belief. And here's where things take a darker turn. Because as the medieval period continued, the stakes got higher. Much higher. Art wasn't just being stolen anymore. It was being fought over. Entire wars were influenced by objects that could be carried, displayed, and claimed. A single relic could justify an invasion. A sacred artifact could unite an army. And once it was taken, it could change everything. During the era of the Crusades, this became especially clear. Armies didn't just march for land. They marched for sacred objects. Relics believed to hold divine power. Objects tied to the life of Jesus Christ. And when cities fell, their treasures were taken. Churches were emptied. Relics were seized. Icons were carried away across continents. Not hidden, not denied, but displayed proudly. As proof of victory. As proof of divine approval. Imagine being on the losing side. Watching as your most sacred objects are taken from you. Objects your community had protected for centuries. Gone. In a single moment. That wasn't just theft. It was psychological warfare. Because it didn't just weaken your city. It shattered your belief. And yet, even in the middle of all this chaos, some of the most incredible heists still happened in silence. No armies. No battles. Just a single moment. Where something priceless disappeared. We're going even deeper. Into stories that feel almost impossible. A crown that vanished without a trace. A relic that appeared in two places at once. And a theft so precise, it may have been an inside job at the highest level. By now, a pattern is starting to emerge. In the medieval world, the greatest heists weren't always loud. They weren't always violent. Sometimes, they were so quiet, so precise, that they felt almost impossible. And in this part, we step into those moments. The ones that make historians stop and ask, how did this even happen? Let's begin with something that should have been untouchable. A crown. Not just any crown, but one tied to royal authority, divine right, and the very idea of kingship itself. In medieval Europe, a crown wasn't just decoration. It was legitimacy. Without it, a king could rule, but he might never truly be accepted. And because of that, crowns were guarded with extreme care. Locked away. Watched constantly. Protected not just by soldiers, but by tradition. And yet, even those protections could fail. There are accounts of royal regalia, crowns, scepters, ceremonial objects, vanishing from secure locations without any clear explanation. No signs of forced entry. No witnesses. No immediate suspects. Just absence. Think about the level of precision required for something like that. You're not just stealing gold. You're stealing identity. Power. A symbol that entire nations recognize. And you're doing it in a world where everyone knows exactly what it looks like. There's no hiding it in plain sight. So how does something like that disappear? One possibility is something we've already touched on. Insiders. People who didn't need to break in, because they were already inside. Servants. Guards. Advisors. People trusted enough to be near these objects every single day. Because sometimes, the strongest walls mean nothing, if the threat is already within them. But let's go even deeper. Because some of the most fascinating medieval heists involve something even stranger than a missing crown. Objects that seem to exist in more than one place at the same time. Yes, you heard that right. In the medieval period, relic duplication was more common than you might expect. Multiple churches would claim to possess the same sacred object. The same bone. The same fragment. The same piece of history. And each one would insist theirs was the original. Now, sometimes this was simply the result of copying or fragmentation over time. But other times, it raised uncomfortable questions. Was one of them fake? Or had the original been taken and replaced? There are stories of relics being quietly swapped. The original removed. A convincing substitute left behind. And unless someone had a way to verify it, which, in most cases, they didn't, no one would know. This kind of theft is different. It's not about disappearance. It's about deception. Because the goal isn't just to take something. It's to make sure no one realizes it's gone. Imagine walking into a cathedral. Seeing the same reliquary. The same display. Everything looks identical. But what's inside? That's a different story. This kind of precision suggests something important. These weren't random acts. They required planning, knowledge, access, and above all, confidence. Now let's talk about something even more unsettling. Heists that may have been ordered from the very top. In the medieval world, rulers didn't always need to steal things themselves. They had people for that. And if a king, a bishop, or a powerful noble wanted a specific object, they could make it happen. Quietly. There are cases where valuable artifacts simply changed ownership without any official record of how. No battle. No negotiation. Just a shift. And behind that shift, there may have been something far more deliberate. Because if you were powerful enough, you didn't need to break the rules. You could rewrite them. Let's take a moment to consider the psychological side of all this. Because medieval art theft wasn't just about objects. It was about belief. If you could take something people believed was sacred, something protected by divine power, and nothing happened to you, what did that mean? Did it mean you were chosen? Protected? Above consequence? Or did it mean something even more dangerous? That the rules people believed in weren't as solid as they thought? That kind of doubt could spread quickly. And in a world built on faith, doubt was powerful. Now, let's move into one of the most intriguing types of medieval heists. The ones that happen during chaos, war, invasion, collapse. Because when order breaks down, opportunity appears. During times of conflict, cities were vulnerable. Defenses weakened. Attention divided. And in those moments, treasures could vanish. Not always taken by the invading army. Sometimes, taken by the people inside. Think about it. You're living in a city under threat. You know it might fall. You know everything could be taken. So what do? You take something first. Hide it. Move it. Sell it. Or keep it for yourself. These weren't always grand, cinematic heists. But they were just as impactful. Because over time, they led to the disappearance of countless objects. Pieces of history that were never seen again. And then there are the stories that feel almost like legends, but may have roots in truth. Objects hidden so well, they were never recovered. Treasures buried, sealed away, lost to time. Not stolen in the traditional sense, but removed from the world. There are whispers of manuscripts hidden during invasions, only to be forgotten. Relics concealed to protect them, never to be found again. In these cases, the heist isn't about taking something for gain. It's about taking it away from everyone. And in doing so, turning it into a mystery that lasts for centuries. By now, one thing should be clear. Medieval art heists weren't just about crime. They were about power, control, belief, and sometimes, survival. But we're not done yet. We're going to explore the most daring, almost unbelievable heists of the medieval world. The ones that feel like they belong in movies. High risk, high reward, and incredibly bold. Including a theft that happened in plain sight. A relic that was taken during a public event. And a heist so daring, it changed the fate of an entire city. At this point, you've seen how medieval art heists could be silent, invisible, almost impossible to detect. But now, everything changes. Because not all thieves hid in the shadows. Some of them walked straight into the light. And took what they wanted, in front of everyone. Let's begin with one of the boldest types of theft imaginable. A heist carried out during a public event. In the medieval world, religious festivals were massive gatherings. Crowds filled the streets. Churches overflowed with people. Music, prayer, movement, everywhere. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and for the right person, the perfect cover. Imagine a cathedral packed with worshippers. At the center, a sacred object is being displayed. A relic. Something people have traveled miles to see. All eyes are on it. All attention focused. And then, in a single moment, it's gone. No one sees it happen. No one notices the exact second it disappears. Because in a crowd like that, distraction is everywhere. A movement here. A sound there. A shift in attention. And just like that, something priceless vanishes. This kind of heist required something rare. Not just courage, but precision. Timing had to be perfect. The thief had to understand human behavior. Where people would look. When they would look away. How long they had before anyone realized something was wrong. And once it was gone, there was no easy way to recover it. Because the crowd itself became the escape route. Now think about the aftermath. Panic. Confusion. Accusations. But no answers. Because the thief wasn't hiding in a dark alley. They were already gone. Blended into hundreds, maybe thousands, of people. This wasn't just theft. It was performance. And in some cases, it may have been planned long before the event even began. Now let's move to something even more daring. A heist that didn't rely on crowds, but on confidence. There are accounts of individuals who didn't sneak into churches or monasteries. They walked in, openly, calmly, as if they belonged there. And in many cases, no one questioned them. In the medieval world, authority was often assumed, not verified. If you looked like you had a purpose, if you carried yourself with confidence, people rarely stopped you. This created a dangerous opportunity. Because a skilled individual could enter a sacred space, approach a valuable object, and simply take it. Not by force. Not by stealth. But by acting as if it was already theirs. Imagine someone walking into a treasury room, nodding to the guards, speaking with certainty, and leaving with something priceless. While everyone assumes it's part of their duty, by the time anyone realizes something is wrong, they're gone. This kind of heist doesn't rely on darkness. It relies on perception. And in many ways, it's one of the most effective methods ever used. Now let's take things even further. Because some of the most impactful medieval art thefts didn't just involve individuals. They involved entire armies. We've already touched on this, but now we need to see the full picture. During large-scale conflicts, especially events like the Fourth Crusade, something extraordinary happened. Armies didn't just fight. They looted. And not just gold or weapons. They targeted art, relics, sacred objects, things that held meaning far beyond material value. When the great city of Constantinople was attacked, it wasn't just a military victory. It was one of the largest transfers of art and religious objects in medieval history. Churches were stripped, treasuries emptied, icons, manuscripts, relics, taken and carried across Europe. Some of these objects ended up in entirely new regions, displayed in different churches, integrated into new traditions. And here's the unsettling part. Many of them were never returned. To the people who lost them, it wasn't just theft. It was cultural erasure. Because once those objects were gone, a part of their history went with them. And to the people who received them, it was the opposite. It was gain, prestige, proof of power. This is where medieval art heists reach their largest scale. Not a single object disappearing in the night, but entire collections being relocated through force. And yet, even in the middle of all this large-scale chaos, some of the most fascinating stories are still the smallest ones. A single object, A single moment. A single decision. There's something almost unbelievable about the idea that a person, just one individual, could change the fate of an artifact that had existed for centuries. But it happened. Because at the end of the day, every great heist comes down to one thing. A choice. The moment someone decides to act. To take something that isn't theirs. To risk everything for it. And in the medieval world, those choices carried enormous weight. Because the consequences weren't just legal. They were spiritual. Stealing a sacred object wasn't just a crime against people. It was seen as a crime against God. And yet, people still did it. Which raises a powerful question. What could possibly drive someone to take that risk? Greed? Power? Belief? Or something even more complicated? We're going to explore the motivations behind these heists. The human side. The reasons why people did what they did. And some of those reasons might surprise you. We'll look at thieves who believed they were doing the right thing. People who stole not for wealth, but for purpose. And stories where the line between hero and criminal becomes almost impossible to see. Up to this point, you've seen how these heists happened. The silence. The precision. The chaos. The boldness. But now we need to answer the most important question of all. Why? Because in the medieval world, stealing a sacred object wasn't just risky. It was terrifying. Not just because of punishment from rulers, but because of something much deeper. The fear of divine consequences. People truly believed that relics were protected. That they carried power. That they were watched over. So choosing to steal one wasn't just a crime. It was a challenge. A challenge to belief itself. And yet, despite that fear, people still did it. Again and again. So what drives someone to cross that line? Let's start with the most obvious answer. Power. In medieval society, power wasn't just about armies or land. It was about perception. What people believed about you. What they felt when they saw your city, your church, your rule. And nothing shaped perception more than sacred objects. If your city possessed an important relic, people didn't just respect you. They trusted you. They believed your city was favored, protected, chosen. That kind of belief was more valuable than gold. Which is why rulers, bishops, and leaders were willing to go to extreme lengths to obtain these objects. Even if it meant taking them. But here's where it gets complicated. Because not everyone saw it as theft. There were people, many of them, who genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. They believed a relic was in the wrong place. That it wasn't being honored properly. That it deserved to be somewhere else. And in their minds, taking it wasn't stealing. It was correcting a mistake. This idea shows up again and again in medieval history. A person travels to a distant place, finds a sacred object, and becomes convinced that it belongs in their home city. They don't sneak. They don't hesitate. They act. And when they return, they are welcomed, celebrated, sometimes even praised for their devotion. Because in the eyes of their community, they didn't commit a crime. They fulfilled a purpose. This is what makes medieval art heists so different from modern ones. Today, theft is usually about money. Clear, direct, transactional. But back then, it was layered, emotional, spiritual. A person could steal something and still believe they were righteous. Now let's talk about another powerful motivation. Fear. Not fear of punishment, but fear of loss. Imagine living in a city that's about to be attacked. You know the walls might not hold. You know invaders could take everything. What do? You protect what matters most. And sometimes, that meant removing it before anyone else could. Relics hidden. Manuscripts buried. Objects taken away secretly to keep them safe. But here's the problem. Once something is hidden, it doesn't always come back. The person who hid it might never return. They might die. They might be captured. They might simply forget where it was placed. And just like that, something priceless is gone. Not stolen for gain, but lost in the name of protection. And over time, these acts blur the line between theft and preservation. Because from one perspective, they saved the object. But from another, they took it away from the world. Now let's explore something even more human. Greed. Yes, even in a deeply religious society, greed still existed. Not everyone was motivated by belief or purpose. Some people saw these objects for what they were worth. Gold, jewels, precious materials. A single reliquary could contain enough wealth to change someone's life forever. And for those willing to take the risk, that temptation was powerful. There are stories of objects being stripped down, relics removed from their ornate containers, gold melted, jewels sold. In these cases, the original meaning of the object didn't matter. Only its material value did. And this is perhaps the most tragic form of medieval art theft. Because it doesn't just remove the object. It destroys it. Erases it completely. Turning something sacred into something ordinary. Now let's go even deeper. Because some motivations weren't about power, fear, or greed. They were about identity. In the medieval world, cities competed with each other constantly. Not just in war, but in reputation. Which city was more important? More holy? More worthy? And having the right objects could make all the difference. If your rival city had a famous relic, and you didn't, you were at a disadvantage. So what do? You acquire one. By any means necessary. This led to a kind of quiet competition. A race. Not for territory, but for meaning. And sometimes, that race crossed a line. Now think about the individuals involved in these heists. They weren't always criminals in the way we think of them today. Some were deeply religious. Some were respected members of their communities. Some may have spent their entire lives in service to faith. And yet, at some point, they made a decision. To take something. Not impulsively. Not accidentally. But deliberately. That moment is what defines every great heist. The decision to act. To step beyond the boundary. To believe, whether rightly or wrongly, that what you're doing is justified. And in the medieval world, that justification could come from many places. Faith, duty, fear, ambition, or simply opportunity. Because sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one chance, one unlocked door, and history changes. We're going to explore the aftermath of these heists. What happened after the theft? Because taking something is only the beginning. What comes next is where the real story unfolds. Objects reappearing in unexpected places. communities reacting in ways you wouldn't expect, and mysteries that remain unsolved to this day. So far, we've seen the moment of the heist, the planning, the execution, the reasons behind it. But now we arrive at something just as important. What happens after? Because stealing an object in the medieval world was only the beginning. The real challenge came next. Keeping it, hiding it, explaining it, or, in some cases, turning it into something even more powerful than before. Let's start with one of the strangest outcomes of medieval art theft. Objects that didn't disappear, but reappeared somewhere else. Imagine this. A relic vanishes from one church. Panic spreads. People search. Prayers are held. No answers. And then, weeks, months, maybe years later, that same object shows up in another city. Not hidden, not denied, but displayed. And the people there claim something extraordinary. They say it wasn't stolen. They say it arrived. This idea appears again and again in medieval history. Objects weren't always taken. They were said to have been moved by divine will. And if enough people believed that, then the story became reality. Because in the medieval mindset, belief shaped truth. If a community accepted that a relic had chosen its new home, then questioning it wasn't just skepticism. It was almost disrespectful. And this created a powerful shield. Because once an object was accepted as legitimate in its new location, getting it back became nearly impossible. Now think about the original owners. They knew it had been taken. They remembered where it came from. They understood what had been lost. But how do you argue against a belief? How do you prove something was stolen when the other side insists it was given? This wasn't just a physical battle. It was a battle of narratives. And in many cases, the stronger narrative won. Now let's move to another outcome. Objects that simply vanished. No reappearance. No explanation. No trace. These are perhaps the most haunting stories of all. Because they leave behind nothing but questions. Some of these objects may have been destroyed. Broken apart for their materials. Lost in fires. Forgotten in hidden places. Others might still exist somewhere. Hidden in private collections. Buried beneath layers of time. But without records, without proof, they become legends. And over time, those legends grow. Stories change. Details blur. Facts mix with imagination. Until no one can say for certain what really happened. Now let's talk about something even more fascinating. Objects that gained more power after being stolen. Yes, more. In some cases, the act of theft itself made an object more important. Think about it. If a relic was valuable enough to be taken, that meant something. It meant people believed in it, desired it, risked everything for it. And that kind of attention only increased its status. A stolen object became a story. And stories are powerful. Pilgrims didn't just come to see the relic. They came to hear what happened to it. How it was taken. How it arrived. What it meant. The theft became part of its identity. And in some cases, that made it even more significant than before. Now let's explore a different kind of aftermath. Conflict. Because not all thefts were accepted quietly. Sometimes, they led to disputes. Arguments between cities. Between churches. between powerful figures, each side claiming ownership, each side presenting their version of the truth. And in a world without modern legal systems, resolving these disputes wasn't easy. There were no clear rules, no standard process, just power, influence, and belief. And sometimes, those disputes escalated, not always into full-scale war, but into long-standing tensions, rivalries that lasted for generations, all over a single object. Now imagine that. An artifact, small enough to carry, causing decades of conflict. That's the kind of impact these heists could have. Now let's look at something more subtle. Silence. There are cases where thefts were never publicly acknowledged. No announcements. No investigations. No accusations. Just quiet acceptance. Why? Because sometimes, revealing the theft would cause more damage than hiding it. If a church admitted that a sacred object had been stolen, what would that say? That it wasn't protected? That it wasn't as powerful as people believed? That doubt could spread quickly. And once it did, it could weaken everything. So instead, they stayed silent, replaced the object, moved on, pretended nothing had happened. And over time, the truth disappeared. Now think about how many times that might have happened. How many objects were taken, without anyone ever knowing? How many stories were never told? How many mysteries were buried? Not by time, but by choice. This is what makes medieval art heists so fascinating. It's not just the act of stealing. It's what comes after. The stories that form. The beliefs that shift. The histories that change. Because once an object is taken, it doesn't just move physically. It moves culturally. It becomes something else. Something shaped not just by what it is, but by what people believe about it. And that belief can last for centuries. We're approaching the final layer of this story. Because we're going to explore the legacy of these heists. What they left behind. How they shaped the world we know today. And why some of these mysteries are still being uncovered. Right now. By now, you've seen the heists. The planning. The motives. The aftermath. But now we arrive at something even bigger. The legacy. Because medieval art heists didn't just affect the people living at that time. They didn't just change a single city or a single church. They echoed forward. Across centuries. All the way to today. Let's start with something simple, but powerful. Ownership. In the medieval world, ownership wasn't always clear. There were no modern laws protecting cultural property. No international agreements. No global systems to track where things came from. If you had something, and you could defend, it was yours. And that idea shaped everything. Because when objects were taken, whether through stealth, war, or belief, they didn't always go back. They stayed. And over time, something interesting happened. People forgot. Not completely, but enough. Generations passed. Stories changed. Details faded. And eventually, what was once stolen became accepted. A relic taken from one city became the pride of another. A manuscript removed from its origin became part of a different tradition. And after a while, no one questioned it anymore. This is how history rewrites itself. Not always through lies, but through time. Now think about how many objects in the world today might have stories like this. Things displayed in churches, museums, collections, with origins that are unclear, or perhaps uncomfortable, because behind their presence, there may be a story of taking, a story that was never fully told. Now let's go deeper, because the legacy of these heists isn't just about objects. It's about influence. Medieval art theft helped shape the cultural map of the world. Objects didn't stay where they were created. They moved across regions, across borders, across entire continents, sometimes by choice, sometimes by force. And as they moved, they carried meaning with them. A relic taken from one place could redefine another. A manuscript transported across borders could influence new ideas, new ways of thinking. This movement of objects, whether we call it theft, transfer, or transformation, helped shape civilizations. Now here's something even more interesting. Some of the greatest mysteries from the medieval world are still unsolved. Objects that disappeared and were never found. Historians search for them. Researchers study records. Clues are examined. But in many cases, there's nothing. No clear answer. No final conclusion. Just possibilities. And that's what makes these stories so powerful. They're not finished. They are still open. Still waiting for someone to uncover the truth. Now imagine this. Somewhere in the world, right now, there could be an object sitting quietly, in a private collection, in a forgotten storage room, in a place no one thinks to look. An object with a history that stretches back hundreds of years. A history that includes a moment, a decision, a heist, and no one around it fully understands what it is, or where it came from. That's not just possible. It's likely, because history doesn't always reveal everything. Sometimes, it hides things. Now let's talk about something even more important. What these stories tell us about people. Because at the center of every heist is a human being. Someone who made a choice. And those choices, across time, reveal something consistent. People value meaning. Not just wealth. Not just power. Meaning. And when something holds meaning, people will do incredible things to possess it. Protect it. Control it. Even risk everything for it. That was true in the medieval world. And it's still true today. Because while the methods have changed, the motivations haven't. We still see disputes over cultural objects. Still see debates about ownership. Still see questions about where things truly belong. And in many ways, those conversations started centuries ago. With moments like the ones you've just heard. Moments where something was taken, moved, hidden, reclaimed, and turned into a story that never truly ended. So when you think about medieval art heists, don't just think about theft. Think about transformation. Because every object that was taken became something more than it was before. A symbol, a story, a mystery. And those mysteries are still with us. Right now. This isn't just history. It's a reminder that what people believe in, what they value, what they fight for, can shape the world in ways that last far longer than they ever imagined. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one decision, one heist, to change everything. You might think the story ended already, that everything important has been said. The heists, the motives, the aftermath, the legacy. But there's one final layer most people never consider. What if some of these heists were never meant to be crimes at all? Because when you look closely at medieval history, something strange begins to appear. A pattern. Objects don't just disappear randomly. They move with purpose. They end up in places where they become more important, not less. And sometimes, that raises a difficult question. Were these events truly theft? Or were they something else entirely? Let's explore that. In the medieval world, the idea of ownership was very different from today. There wasn't always a clear line between mine and yours. Especially when it came to sacred objects. Because people didn't believe these objects truly belonged to them. They believed the objects belonged to something higher. So if a relic moved from one place to another, it wasn't always seen as being taken. It was seen as being guided. This belief changes everything. Because it means the act itself wasn't always judged by what happened, but by how it was interpreted. If a relic ended up in a powerful, growing city, people would say it was meant to be there. If it brought wealth, attention, and influence, that only reinforced the belief. And over time, the story of how it arrived would shift. Details would soften. Intentions would change. Until the idea of theft disappeared completely, replaced by something far more acceptable. Destiny. Now think about how powerful that is. If you can control the story, you can control how people understand the event. And in the medieval world, stories weren't just entertainment. They were truth. Passed down. Repeated. Believed. So a single act, one moment where something was taken, could be transformed into something entirely different. Not a crime, but a miracle. Now let's take this even further. Because sometimes, the line between theft and preservation becomes almost impossible to see. There are cases where objects were removed from dangerous places. Taken during times of war. Carried away to prevent them from being destroyed. At first, this seems like protection. But what happens after the danger passes? Do they return the object? Not always. Because now, that object has a new role. A new identity. A new story. And giving it back would mean losing all of that. So it stays. And the longer it stays, the harder it becomes to imagine it anywhere else. Now here's something even more interesting. Some of these movements, whether we call them theft or not, actually helped preserve history. Think about it. If certain manuscripts hadn't been taken, they might have been lost, burned, destroyed in conflict. If certain relics hadn't been moved, they might have disappeared completely. So in a strange, almost paradoxical way, the act of taking something may have saved it. But at what cost? Because while the object survives, its original context doesn't always survive with it. Where it came from, who protected it, what it meant to the people who lost it. Those pieces fade. And what remains is only part of the story. Now let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Across the medieval world, thousands of objects moved. Some taken in secret. Some taken in war. Some taken in the name of faith. And each one carried a story. But not all of those stories survived. Some were rewritten. Some were forgotten. Some were never told at all. And that means something important. What we know today is only a fraction of what actually happened. There are gaps, missing pieces, unanswered questions. And in those gaps, there are still mysteries waiting. Now imagine being able to go back, to stand in one of those moments, to see exactly what happened. Was it planned? Was it spontaneous? Was it justified? Was it wrong? We might never know, because history doesn't always give us clear answers. Sometimes, it only gives us stories, and those stories depend on who tells them. So when you hear about a medieval art heist, ask yourself something simple. Whose story is this? The person who lost the object? Or the person who gained it? Because the truth may lie somewhere in between. And that's what makes this topic so fascinating. It's not just about objects being taken. It's about how those moments are remembered, how they are interpreted, how they are transformed into something bigger than themselves, and how, even after centuries, they still shape the way we see the past. So in the end, the greatest art heists of medieval history aren't just about theft. They're about perspective, about belief, about the power of a single moment to echo across time and leave behind a question that may never be fully answered. Was it a crime? Or was it something else? You've seen the heists. You've seen the motives, the aftermath, the legacy, even the blurred line between crime and belief. But now, we reach the final layer. The one that connects everything. Because here's the truth most people don't realize. The greatest medieval art heists never really ended. They didn't stop when the object was taken. They didn't stop when it was displayed somewhere new. They didn't even stop when people forgot. They continued, quietly, across generations. Let's begin with something simple. An object is stolen in the medieval world. It's moved to a new city, accepted, celebrated. Time passes. Decades turn into centuries. And eventually, no one remembers the original place it came from. At that point, something powerful happens. The heist becomes invisible. Not because it didn't happen, but because it's no longer recognized as a heist. It becomes history. Now think about that. How many objects in the world today are sitting in plain sight, with stories that were never fully told? Stories of movement, of taking, of transformation. But no one questions them anymore, because they've become part of something bigger. This is what makes medieval art theft so unique. It doesn't just take something from one place and give it to another. It changes how that object is understood forever. Now let's go deeper. Because sometimes, the heist didn't just disappear. It evolved. There are cases where the story of a stolen object was reshaped over time. Details changed. Events reinterpreted. Until the original act became almost unrecognizable. A theft becomes a journey. A removal becomes a rescue. A crime becomes a miracle. And once that transformation is complete, the truth becomes almost impossible to recover, because it's buried beneath layers of belief. Now imagine trying to uncover that truth today. Historians look at records, fragments of writing, clues left behind. But those clues are often incomplete, biased, written by people with their own perspectives. So even when we try to understand what happened, we're not seeing the full picture. We're seeing pieces. And those pieces don't always fit perfectly. That's why some of the greatest medieval art heists remain mysteries. Not because they were perfectly executed, but because time itself helped hide them. Now let's consider something even more fascinating. The idea that some of these objects might still be moving. Not physically, but in meaning. An object that was once a relic becomes a historical artifact. A manuscript once considered sacred becomes a subject of study. A stolen treasure becomes a cultural symbol. Its identity changes. Again and again. And with each change, its story shifts slightly. Until what it represents today is very different from what it represented centuries ago. This is the long-term impact of these heists. They don't just move objects. They move meaning. Now let's step back one last time. Across all these stories, one thing remains constant. Human nature. The desire to possess. To protect. To control. To believe. Those motivations haven't changed. Only the methods have. Today, we have laws, systems, institutions. But even now, disputes over cultural objects still happen. Questions about ownership still arise. Debates about where things truly belong still continue. And when you trace those debates back far enough, you often find yourself in the medieval world. At the moment where something was taken, because that moment set everything in motion. Now imagine if that moment had never happened. If the object had stayed where it was. Would history look different? Would cultures have developed differently? Would certain cities have gained or lost influence? We can't know for sure. But what we do know is this. Those moments mattered. More than anyone at the time could have imagined. Because they didn't just affect one generation. They shaped many. And they continue to shape how we see the past today. So in the end, the greatest art heists in medieval history aren't just stories about theft. They are stories about movement, transformation, and the lasting impact of a single decision. A decision made in a specific moment that echoes across centuries and reminds us of something important. History isn't just what happened. It's what survives, what's remembered, and sometimes, what's hidden. So the next time you see an ancient object, a relic, a manuscript, a piece of art with a long history, ask yourself one question. How did it get here? Because the answer might be far more complicated than it seems. You've come this far. Through shadows, silence, belief, power, and mystery. But now, we arrive at something deeper than any heist. The truth behind all of them. Because if you strip everything away, the relics, the gold, the manuscripts, the stories, what you're left with is something much simpler. A moment. Every great medieval art heist begins the same way. A single person stands in front of something valuable, something meaningful, something powerful. And in that moment, they make a decision. No audience, no history books, no future consequences in their mind. Just a choice. To take it, or to leave it. And everything that follows, every story, every legend, every mystery, comes from that one decision. Now imagine how many times that moment has happened. Not just in the stories we know, but in the ones we don't. In quiet monasteries. In crowded cathedrals. In royal chambers. In forgotten towns. Moments that were never recorded, never written down, but still changed something. Because not every heist becomes famous. Some disappear completely. An object goes missing. No one talks about it. No record survives. And over time, it's as if it never existed. But it did. And somewhere along the line, someone made that choice. Now let's think about something even more powerful. What if some of the greatest heists were never discovered? Not because they were perfectly hidden, but because they were perfectly accepted. An object moves. A story is created. People believe it. And just like that, the truth is replaced. No investigation. No suspicion. Just belief. And belief is one of the strongest forces in history. Because once people accept something as true, it becomes almost impossible to challenge. That's how a theft becomes a miracle. That's how a disappearance becomes destiny. That's how history changes, without anyone realizing it. Now bring all of this together. Across the medieval world, thousands of objects moved. Some taken in darkness. Some taken in chaos. Some taken in full view of everyone. And each one carried a consequence. Not always immediate. Not always visible. But real. Because every time something was taken, something else was left behind. A gap. A question. A shift in belief. And over time, those gaps shaped entire cultures. Now here's the part most people never think about. We are living with those consequences. Right now. The world we see today. The distribution of art, relics, manuscripts. The stories attached to them. They didn't happen randomly. They were shaped by moments like these. By decisions made centuries ago. By people who could never have imagined the future we live in now. And yet, their choices still matter. That's the true scale of these heists. They're not just events in the past. They are forces that shaped the present. Now imagine if even one of those moments had gone differently. If one person had chosen not to take something. If one object had stayed where it was. How many stories would change? How many histories would look different? We'll never know. Because history only shows us what happened. Not what could have happened. And that's what makes it so fascinating. Now, as we reach the end of this journey, there's one final idea to leave you with. The greatest art heists in medieval history aren't just about loss. They're about transformation. Because nothing that was taken remained the same. Not the object. Not the place it came from. Not the place it ended up. Everything changed. And those changes didn't stop. They continued. Through stories. Through belief. Through time. Until they reached us. So the next time you hear about a medieval relic, a lost manuscript, a mysterious artifact, don't just think about what it is. Think about its journey. Where it started. Where it went. What happened along the way. Because hidden inside that journey is a moment, a choice, a heist. And that moment changed everything. Even after 10 parts, the story of medieval art heists doesn't truly end. Because while we've explored the heists, the motives, the aftermath, and the legacy, there's an entire hidden layer most historians barely touch. This is the layer of secrets that never surfaced. Objects stolen that were never recorded. Relics moved quietly. Manuscripts vanished without a trace. Think about that. Centuries ago, someone made a choice to take something. They might have been a servant, a soldier, a monk, or even a ruler. No one documented it. No one questioned it. And yet, that choice changed history. Some of these objects may still exist. In private collections. In forgotten monasteries. Buried in the walls of old castles. Or maybe they were destroyed. Melted down, burned, lost in war. And that's what makes these heists so mysterious. They weren't just about objects. They were about stories, belief, power, memory. Here's something fascinating. Some stolen objects became legends because of the theft itself. A relic that was lost became more revered. A manuscript that vanished gained a myth around it. Stealing, in the medieval mindset, could transform an object from ordinary to legendary. A daring act could give it a new identity. And the ripple effect. It affected not just art or religion, but politics. A stolen relic could legitimize a ruler. A lost manuscript could change a city's intellectual reputation. Even today, we feel the echoes of these decisions. Museums, libraries, churches, so many of their collections exist because of centuries-old movements. Some stolen, some gifted, some hidden, some lost. And the ultimate truth is this. The line between crime, devotion, and destiny was never clear. In medieval Europe, a heist could be sinful, righteous, or miraculous all at once. So when you look at an old relic, a medieval manuscript, or a sacred artifact today, ask yourself, who moved it? Why? What story was created along the way? And how did that single act echo through centuries? Because the greatest art heists of medieval history are more than stories of theft. They are stories of humanity, of ambition, faith, greed, and courage. Of choices that shaped history in ways no one could have predicted. And even now, the story continues. Some artifacts still wait to be found. Some stories still wait to be told. Some mysteries will never be solved. The medieval art heist isn't just history. It's a mirror of our past and the forces that shape the present. This is the layer that connects everything. The layer of hidden truths. The layer that proves one moment, one decision, one heist can echo for centuries. After 10 previous parts, we've explored the shadowy corridors of medieval art theft, the motivations, the aftermath, the legacy, the myths, and the hidden truths. Now, it's time to close the story. But this final part isn't just a recap. It's a culmination. A look at the most legendary heists, their impact, and what they tell us about history, humanity, and the power of a single act. Some heists are ordinary, objects stolen for greed or survival. Some are extraordinary, bold, daring, almost unbelievable. Here are a few of the ones that have echoed through history. A jeweled crown, said to belong to a revered king, vanished from a cathedral in Northern Europe. Guards claimed they saw nothing. Witnesses reported nothing. Yet decades later, the crown reappeared in a distant monastery, celebrated as if it had been miraculously delivered. Was it stolen? Was it protected? Or was it guided by divine will? No one can be certain. During a siege, a library in southern France was said to have been looted. Manuscripts containing knowledge of medicine, philosophy, and astronomy disappeared. Some were later found in private collections far away. Others remain missing to this day. Scholars speculate that these heists saved knowledge that could have otherwise been destroyed or erased forever. During the Fourth Crusade, countless religious relics were taken from Constantinople. Churches across Europe received them. Some became symbols of legitimacy for rulers. Some inspired devotion in new cities. Others vanished entirely, remembered or forgotten. This single heist reshaped the distribution of sacred objects across the continent and transformed cultural, religious, and political landscapes. One of the boldest medieval heists happened in plain sight. During a grand festival, a sacred relic was displayed publicly. Amid the crowd, it disappeared. Guards were powerless, witnesses confused, and the thief vanished into the city. This act of audacity proved that sometimes confidence and timing outweigh stealth. Lessons from medieval art heists. So, what do these stories teach us? Choices matter. Every heist began with one decision. One person deciding to act. One moment that changed centuries of history. Meaning over material, objects were stolen not just for wealth, but for power, belief, and identity. History is shaped by stories. A theft isn't just an event, it's a story. And the way that story is defines how we understand the past. Legacy is long-lasting. Even centuries later, the consequences of medieval heists are felt. Objects still reside in new locations, histories still debate their origins, and mysteries remain unsolved. The line between crime and purpose is blurred. Sometimes the thief believed they were saving the object. Sometimes the act was politically motivated. Sometimes it was greed. Often, it was all at once. Medieval art heists weren't just crimes, they were acts that transformed culture, belief, and power. They remind us that objects carry meaning far beyond their physical form. That one decision can echo through centuries. That history is shaped not just by battles and kings, but by choices, quiet, daring, or audacious, that move pieces of the world in ways no one could fully anticipate. And even today, the story continues. Some objects are still lost. Some stories are still untold. Some mysteries remain hidden, waiting for someone to uncover them. Next time you see a medieval artifact, a relic, a manuscript, or a piece of art, don't just admire it. Think of its journey. Think of the choices that moved it. The hands that risked everything. The eyes that watched it vanish. And the centuries of history it silently shaped. Because within every object, there is a story, a heist, a decision, and a legacy that continues to this day.